Hi, my name is Octavia. I'm 31 years old. On Christmas Eve, in front of 20 people, my father stood up. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Pay rent or get out." The room went silent. Only the fireplace crackled like it was mocking me. And then my sister Vera raised her glass, smirked, and whispered just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Good luck with that." The laughter spread like wildfire. Neighbors, cousins, even strangers joining in. No one defended me. No one blinked. So I gathered my things, walked out into the freezing Wisconsin night, and shut the door behind me for the last time. But what if that wasn't the beginning? What if my family had been preparing my exit all along? I used to think Christmas Eve was the breaking point. But the truth is, my family had been erasing me for years. When I was 17, a scholarship letter came. I never saw it. I found out later it was hidden, tucked in a box. Deadline long expired. Why? Because leaving meant freedom, and freedom meant they'd lose the girl who cooked, cleaned, and kept things afloat. The savings account my grandmother helped build for me, birthday checks, summer job wages, graduation gifts, emptied before I even knew it existed. Household needs, that's what Dad called it. Bills, groceries, little emergencies. But the emergencies always seemed to be Vera's. She got a car at 21, a shiny compact with a red bow on top. I got the bus schedule taped to the fridge. Dad laughed when I asked about it. "You've always been more independent," he said, as if being overlooked was some kind of compliment. Every holiday I was given the same chair, the one next to the bathroom door. People brushed past me all night, excusing themselves, never noticing. I was the only one who never truly sat at the table. Vera sat next to Dad, center of the room, center of every story, refilling glasses like a hostess at a gala. Me, I passed dishes, smiled politely, and disappeared behind the steam of my own plate. Even my name was negotiable. Octavia became Octa on place cards, O on birthday cakes, and once Madison, a name not even close to mine, on last year's gift tag. At first, I thought it was careless. Then I realized it was deliberate. Every mistake another small erasure. A reminder that remembering me wasn't worth the effort. And then came the words they loved to repeat. "You're dramatic. You're lucky we gave you a roof." This family isn't a charity. But what charity demands that the person they shelter pay the bills, cook the meals, and disappear quietly into the corner? I should have known then that Christmas Eve wasn't a beginning. It was a finale years in the making. Leaving that house on Christmas Eve should have felt like disaster. Instead, it felt like unclipping a weight I hadn't noticed. I hadn't realized it was strapped to my chest. For the first time in years, the silence belonged to me. No footsteps overhead, no Vera shouting into a phone, no Dad's TV rattling through thin walls. Just quiet. I didn't unpack much that first night, only the basics. A toothbrush, clean pajamas, the cheap lamp from my room. Still, I slept better on that half-made bed. Better than I had in an entire decade. The next morning, I woke before the winter sun. My body expected the old routine: tidy, brew, serve. Tasks no one thanked me for, performed without witnesses. Instead, I boiled water just for me and waited. Snow tapped the glass, small knuckles testing the world. My whole life felt smaller now, but finally mine. That first week, I built a new rhythm. I transferred bills out of my name, canceled subscriptions. I rerouted mail and cleaned each corner of the house, not out of obligation, but because I wanted it to shine. I bought groceries only I liked, arranged them neatly. No more labels to keep Vera from taking them. No more explaining why coffee pods vanished overnight. I started small rituals to remind myself I existed. Light a candle before bed. Keep lemons in a bowl. Stick a note on the fridge that said, "Stay." Meanwhile, my phone buzzed with guilt and commands. Group texts, missed calls, voicemails heavy with performance. I let them pile up like snowdrifts at dawn. Every hour I stayed silent. My spine grew straighter. On day 3, I printed every transfer to Dad's account. I slid them into a folder labeled receipts. For once, the records weren't for him. They were mine. For my sanity, my future, my version of truth. I opened the family photo album one last time. Cropped pictures, wrong captions, blurry edges where I vanished. This time I clicked remove access, then closed the tab. For the first time, they couldn't delete me, because I had already walked out on my own. The house began to warm as I settled in. The walls stopped echoing. The quiet turned honest. I invited no one, yet the space never felt empty. Each night I whispered before the light switch clicked. "This is mine, this is real." And still I knew the silence wouldn't last. In my family, silence means someone is loading ammo. Ready for the next strike, aimed straight at me. On day 3, I opened my bank app out of habit. Line after line read, rent home, neat, monthly, 4 straight years. I clicked 1, then 10 more, my stomach tightening fast. I called the mortgage company, waded through nervous piano loops. The rep was careful. You're not on the account. And that loan is delinquent. 3 months behind, she said. Silence followed. No comfort, only confirmation collecting in my chest. I wasn't living under his roof after all. He was living off my paycheck, month after month. Embarrassment came first, then heat under my collar. I downloaded every transfer, stacked PDFs like bricks. Paper trails keep reality real. I learned that young. Then my email pinged. Urgent credit alert. New account opened. A department store card. My name, my old address on file. Another alert. Home goods chain, same address, same name. Purchases. Designer heels, a Vitamix, an $800 dryer. 2 days before Christmas, someone bought a luxury blowout. On me. I froze my credit, filed disputes, opened the shipping details. Recipient, clear as daylight on the screen. Vera Calloway. It wasn't a mistake. It was theft with a bow. Shame blinked, then hardened into a clean, cold resolve. I called each bureau, set verbal passwords no one could guess. I used a phrase my mother wrote once, just for me. A knock came, measured, human, not the family drumbeat. Aunt Deborah stood in snow, pressed a thumb drive into my hand. Your mother would be proud. You're not wrong, she said, leaving. The video loaded. Vera's engagement party, phones and champagne. Someone asked off camera, will Octavia be a bridesmaid? Vera rolled her eyes. She's the emergency fund, the backup account. Harland laughed, glass raised. She doesn't mind. She's helpful. They didn't whisper. Why would they? No one disagreed. I paused on their smiles, polished, practiced, perfectly unashamed. In their world, I wasn't a daughter. I was liquidity. I printed the transcript, clipped it behind bank PDFs. Alerts, dispute numbers, shipping names, dates hammered into order. The folder got heavy, the way truth does when bound. The printer hummed like a metronome for my new spine. I booked a certified mailing pickup, signatures required on receipt. I slid 3 white envelopes onto my desk, 1 each. Harland. Denise. Vera. Evidence and terms, not apologies. Christmas Eve wasn't a beginning. It was their finale. And it was my opening statement, clear and prepared. Next, I would hand them the receipts. And consequences. I made 3 duplicate sets, zipped the originals tight. Certified mail was queued. These were hand-delivered copies. Same cracked driveway. I didn't knock. I walked in like a truth with shoes. Kitchen. Vera scrolling. Harland chewing. Denise stirring. No one greeted me. No one used my full name. I set 3 envelopes on the table. Open them, I said. Harland smirked. Then the first page erased the smirk. Bank transfers. 4 years of rent never sent to the bank. Delinquent notices. Credit alerts. Shipping with Vera's name. A transcript where you called me an emergency fund. Vera laughed. You printed the internet. I met her eyes. You forged me. You spent me. Harland cleared his throat. Be reasonable. Family handles family. Family doesn't commit identity theft, I said, steady and cold. My terms. Today, not someday. 1. Reimburse every dollar or we litigate. Itemized, public. 2. Destroy the cards, photo proof and a witness. 3. Stop using my name, address, number permanently. 4. Any charge after today triggers police, not conversation. Denise stepped forward, arms open like mercy. I stepped back. No more hugs from people who steal. Harland tried the old coaching voice. We gave you a roof. I slid a printout. Custodial withdrawals, zeroed account. You used my savings to pay that roof, I said. Grandma's gifts, my wages, graduation checks, gone. The roof wasn't over me. I was the roof. Vera's chin lifted. You love drama more than rent, Octa. Say my name, I said, then say theft. Denise whispered. We were struggling. Compassion? I am, I said to myself. Sign acknowledgements and a 30-day repayment schedule. Decline, and the next signatures are sworn statements. Harland's jaw worked. You won't call the cops on your father. I tapped the stack square. Reports filed, case numbers inside. Letters to counsel are queued. Stamps are paid. I came to offer you a quieter road. Vera hissed. You'll regret this when nobody shows up. Nobody showed last night, I said. I survived. I left the envelopes. Copies, the originals don't live here. At the door, Harlan tried one last line of credit. You walk out now, don't come back for help. I looked at the man who edited my life. I'm not asking, I said. I'm auditing. And the balance you owe is due. Winter met me like a clean ledger. Cold, exact. I watched my breath cloud, then vanish. I drove. Ink, not snow, my line was drawn to hold. But lines invite tests. Tests always come calling. The first ring hit before I reached the corner. I should have let it ring. I didn't. The phone rang before I reached the corner. I answered anyway. Harland was careful, coached. Let's talk before this gets uglier. I already filed, I said. Case number's inside. A pause. Then the old threat dressed as concern. You're alone now. I'm not, I said and hung up. Home met me with honest heat and a locked door. I filed the receipts. The weight steadied me. On a high shelf, one unlabeled box waited. Yearbooks, programs, a manila envelope with my name. Chicago University, full ride, 7 winters old. On the back, his note. She's too important here. The years landed, then slid off like ice from glass. Beneath it, a pink envelope in my mother's hand. To my Octavia, open when they doubt your shine. Her line was simple. If they say you're too much, remember they weren't enough to hold you. Behind it, a savings bond, the seed of this house. Even gone, she'd left me a way through. I wrote one final letter. Dates, amounts, requests. Reimbursements, releases, no contact terms attached. Fraud reports and freezes verified. Signed, scanned, sent. Closure, not spectacle. The group chat fluttered, then went quiet. No apologies. Sometimes silence is the closest to sorry. I opened a new file, unwritten her. A fund and clinic days for women like me. We don't need louder voices, just exits and receipts. Before bed, I taped 2 lines in the front closet. Family isn't ownership. Boundaries aren't betrayal. Lights off. The house kept breathing. Morning came clean across the floorboards. 1 cup, 1 kitchen, 1 quiet life. I wrote 3 words on a new page. I release you. Not to bless them, to keep myself whole. I'm not staying angry. I'm just not staying. If they rewrite me, I have the originals filed. If they knock, there's a lock and a letterhead waiting. If you've had to draw a line with family, tell me in the comments. You're not alone.
The dining room glowed with the soft light of candles, their flames flickering against the polished wood of my mother's table. Outside, the humid Charleston evening pressed against the windows, carrying the faint scent of salt from the harbor. Plates clinked, laughter rippled across the table, and the low hum of conversation wrapped around me, except none of it seemed to reach my end. Mom moved gracefully between chairs, her hands steady as she placed thick cuts of steak in front of my sister Marigold, her husband Patrick, and their 2 children. She followed with a flourish, producing a box of imported French tarts, each one glossy under the chandelier. They were placed carefully, deliberately, as if arranging jewels. I watched every plate fill, every smile of gratitude, until at last there was nothing left for me but the cool shine of an empty charger. I glanced at my fork and knife, lined neatly, untouched. My roast chicken from the first course had already gone cold. My stomach tightened, but it wasn't hunger. It was something heavier, the weight of a role I had played too long. Across the table, Aunt Meredith's brows knit together. She leaned forward, her voice cutting through the clamor. Claudine, didn't you prepare one for Celine? Mom's smile was as light as her tone. I only served for family. The words landed with the softness of silk and the cruelty of glass. A murmur passed around the table, forks pausing mid-air. Marigold smirked, her hand resting comfortably on Patrick's arm as if she had already won something I hadn't known was a contest. Heat flushed my face, my fingers curled under the table, nails pressing into my palm until I steadied them. I lifted my eyes to my mother, then to the sister who had been given everything I was denied. My voice trembled, but it carried. Am I not family? The clatter of dishes faded, laughter stilled, and the only sound left was the hum of the chandelier above as the room sank into silence that no one seemed willing to break. It was in that silence that I felt the first thread of resolve begin to pull tight, connecting me back to where it all began. The silence at that dinner table took me back to another kind of silence, the one that filled our house after my father collapsed in the backyard when I was 14. A heart attack, sudden and merciless. One minute he was trimming the hedges, the next he was gone, leaving my mother, my sister, and me adrift in a house that no longer felt steady. In the weeks that followed, bills piled on the counter like storm clouds. Mom's grief turned sharp, practical. "We'll manage," she told me, her voice flat, as if determination alone could stretch a widow's pension to cover everything. And we did manage because I picked up shifts after school at a small bookstore on King Street, while other kids studied for SATs or lingered at football games. I was counting out cash drawers, learning how to balance ledgers, and bringing home grocery money. Goldie, barely 12 then, was spared from all of it. Mom called her the baby, as though the years between us were oceans. Goldie kept her allowance, kept her afternoons free for sketching and painting, while I scrubbed coffee stains from my work polo and prayed the bus wouldn't be late again. By the time I turned 18, I enrolled at Trident Technical College's legal studies program. 2 nights a week, I sat under fluorescent lights, studying tort law and contracts while balancing a full-time job in an accounting office. Goldie, meanwhile, got her acceptance letter to the Savannah College of Art and Design. Mom beamed, saying, "This is what your father would have wanted." She never said that when I showed her my community college ID, tuition, supplies, rent in Savannah. Mom covered it all for Goldie, writing checks from the account I quietly supplemented with my own wages. Whenever I asked why things had to be so uneven, she'd sigh and rest her hand on mine. "Goldie needs more support. You're stronger. Celine." At the time, I clung to the words like they were praise. Maybe being strong was enough, but sitting at that dinner table years later with an empty plate, I finally began to wonder if strong had only ever been her excuse to give me less. Adulthood didn't change the balance. If anything, it sharpened the edges. Goldie married Patrick in a sprawling wedding on the Battery, the kind of Charleston affair that filled the newspaper's society pages. There were strings quartets, fresh orchids shipped in from Florida, and champagne towers that sparkled under the chandeliers of the old customs house. Mom paid for nearly everything. She said it was tradition, that fathers used to cover the costs, and since ours wasn't there, she would take on the role. I stood at the edge of the photographs in a dress I had bought secondhand and altered myself. My contribution was silent. I slipped out early from work every day that week to help arrange flowers and Ferry Place cards, while my student loan statement sat unopened on my kitchen counter. Mom never asked about those. She only asked if Goldie was rested, if Patrick's family was impressed, if the colors looked right in the reception hall. When the wedding bills cleared, Goldie and Patrick moved into a newly built house in West Ashley, part of a development that advertised luxury coastal living. Mom helped with the down payment. I, meanwhile, stayed in my one-bedroom rental and chipped away at debt with every paycheck. By the time I finally sent in the last loan payment, no one noticed. Holidays followed the same script. Goldie's children opened tablets, bicycles, monogrammed sweaters. Patrick unwrapped a designer watch one Christmas, the kind with Roman numerals etched in gold. I got a scented candle regifted. I realized, when I saw a smudge of someone else's handwriting still faintly on the box. Mom brushed it off when I raised an eyebrow. "Goldie has children now. She needs more," she said, as if that justified the imbalance. But more never seemed to stop. Every birthday, every Easter, every 4th of July cookout, it was always Goldie's family at the center, with me orbiting on the outside. I told myself it was fine. That strength meant self-sufficiency. Yet each time I sat quietly while they compared gifts or vacations, a small voice inside asked how long strength was supposed to last without recognition. That voice followed me straight into the next holiday gathering. By the time Goldie's children were old enough to run through the hallways with sticky fingers, Mom had quietly reassigned me from guest to worker at every family gathering. At Thanksgiving, she would press an apron into my hands before I even had a chance to set down my purse. "You're so efficient in the kitchen. Celine, could you baste the turkey? Make sure the pies don't burn at birthdays." I was handed balloons to tie, chairs to unfold, and Goldie's kids to chase while she and Patrick posed for photos. It wasn't just chores, it was expectation. I was supposed to anticipate needs before anyone asked, to clear plates, pour drinks, hush crying children, all while staying invisible enough not to disrupt the glow around my sister's family. One Christmas, after hours of cooking and wrapping, I sat down last at the tree while the others tore through piles of packages. Goldie gasped as she opened a velvet box from Mom, revealing a delicate bracelet lined with pearls. Patrick grinned, sliding the clasp shut around her wrist. My turn came with a paper bag and a mug inside floral print, chipped along the rim. A faint coffee stain marked the bottom. I remembered seeing the same mug on Mom's counter weeks earlier. Patrick laughed, tilting his glass toward me. "Celine, you should take notes. This is how family looks out for each other." His arm wrapped tightly around Goldie as if the joke were harmless. I forced a smile, but the heat rose in my throat. In that moment, the house didn't feel like the place I grew up, the place where Dad's voice once filled the kitchen on Saturday mornings. It felt like a stage where I had been cast as the servant in a play I hadn't auditioned for. Mom never looked at me with malice. She looked at me with practicality, as if it were natural I should hold the weight so Goldie could shine. "You're strong," she would remind me, but strength, in her mouth, sounded like a command rather than a comfort. That night, as I gathered empty wine glasses and wiped crumbs from the table, I realized that every holiday had turned into proof that strength meant service and service meant silence. But silence only stretches so far before it breaks. The smell of seared steak lingered heavy in the room, mingling with the sweetness of the French tarts as they were unboxed like treasures. Mom's hands moved with the same deliberate grace I'd seen all my life, setting the plates before Goldie, Patrick, their children, and a few cousins who had come down from Colombia. Each plate gleamed with its own perfect cut, juices glistening under the chandelier. The desserts followed, each tart placed carefully beside the steak as though presentation itself were proof of love. When Mom passed by me, her tray suddenly lighter, my place remained bare. The porcelain charger reflected the overhead light, mocking in its emptiness. My roast chicken, carved earlier and long gone cold, sat forgotten at the edge of the table. Aunt Meredith's brow furrowed, her voice breaking the rhythm of chatter. "Claudine, didn't you prepare one for Celine?" Mom turned, her smile soft, airy, as though she'd been caught in nothing at all. "I only served for family." The words slipped out so easily they might have been rehearsed. Around me, silverware paused. Goldie's lips curled into a smirk as she leaned forward, eyes glittering. "Don't be dramatic. Celine, you're fine with chicken." My chest tightened, heat rising like a tide I couldn't hold back. For years, I had swallowed the small humiliations mugs regifted, chores assigned, glances that cut without words. But sitting there, surrounded by laughter and the clink of wine glasses, I felt every slight collapse onto this single moment, sharp and unbearable. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs, steadying the tremor in my hands. My gaze fixed on Mom, who was already turning toward Goldie as if her performance were finished. The air seemed to thicken, a waiting silence pressing at my ribs. For the first time, I didn't lower my eyes. My voice broke the hush, steadier than I felt. "Am I not family?" The table froze. Forks hovered mid-air. Conversations dissolved into stillness. The chandelier hummed faintly above us, the only sound left in the room, while all eyes shifted toward me. The words I had never dared to say were suddenly alive, demanding an answer. No one rushed to fill the silence. Mom's smile wavered, caught between irritation and dismissal. But she didn't answer me. I let the quiet stretch until the weight of it pressed against the walls. My hands stopped trembling. My voice came clearer than I expected. "This isn't about steak or dessert," I said, though the untouched plate in front of me glared like evidence. "This is about the way I've been treated for years, like I don't belong at my own mother's table." A few relatives shifted in their seats. Patrick cleared his throat, but I kept going. Every holiday, every birthday, I'm the one cooking, cleaning, babysitting, while Goldie gets the gifts, the praise, the place at the center. I've been told I'm strong, but that was just another way of saying I didn't deserve care. Mom's lips tightened. "Celine, this isn't the time." When was it ever the time, I asked, leaning forward? Was it the time you went through my drawers looking for something to criticize? Or when you reminded me I wasn't blood enough to join the lake trip? Aunt Meredith's eyes flicked to Mom, searching. But Mom looked away. Goldie finally broke in with a laugh sharp enough to slice the air. "God, you sound so jealous. You've always been bitter that Mom gives me more." I turned toward her, steady. "Jealous of what dependence?" Her smile faltered. I didn't stop. "You live off handouts, Mom's money, Patrick's promises, and you think that makes you enviable? I've carried myself without expecting anyone else to foot my bills. I don't envy you. Goldie, I pity you." Gasps scattered down the table. Goldie's face flushed red. Patrick shifted uncomfortably, and Mom's knuckles whitened against her wine glass. For the first time, the words I had buried for years weren't locked inside me. They were out, burning through the air, and there was no taking them back. Goldie's eyes darted away. But I didn't let the moment slip. "You call me jealous," I said, my voice steady. "But I know the truth about your perfect little family." A murmur passed through the table. Goldie straightened, defensive. "What are you talking about?" I folded my hands in my lap, though my pulse hammered. "I know about the mortgage you're months behind on. I know about the credit cards, maxed out in Patrick's name. And I know Mom has been covering your bills quietly, funneling money so you can keep up appearances." Gasps rippled down the table. Forks clattered. Patrick's face drained of color. Mom's cheeks flushed crimson, her composure cracking. "That's not for dinner conversation," she snapped, her voice sharp with panic. "I only wanted to protect Goldie's children. They shouldn't suffer because their parents are struggling." I leaned forward, my voice cutting through hers. "You've starved one daughter of love to feed the other with lies. You call it protection, but it's favoritism dressed up as sacrifice." Goldie slammed her hand against the table, silverware rattling. "You're just bitter you never had a family of your own. No husband, no children. That's why you're so eager to tear mine apart." The sting was real, but it didn't land the way she wanted. I met her glare, calm. Better no family than a cage built from shame. Her jaw dropped. Words caught in her throat. Around us. The room quivered in silence. The spell of superiority that had long shielded her cracking under the weight of exposed truth. Claudine clutched her napkin, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Patrick stared at his plate as though answers might be carved into the china. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one shrinking at the table. I was the one forcing everyone else to see what had been hiding in plain sight, and that shift left the air sharp, charged, impossible to ignore as I prepared to take my stand. I pushed my chair back, the scrape of wood against wood cutting through the suffocating quiet. My napkin fell to the floor, a small white flag I had no intention of picking up. Slowly, I reached for my bag, sliding the strap over my shoulder as if I were simply excusing myself from an ordinary dinner. But nothing about this moment was ordinary. "I'm done," I said, my voice low but firm. "I've been half a daughter my entire life, and I won't play that part anymore." Goldie let out a sharp laugh, the sound brittle. "Oh, please, "You're being dramatic again." Before I could reply, Aunt Meredith rose from her chair. Her presence was quiet but commanding, her eyes fixed on Mom. "Claudine, this was cruel. You humiliated her in front of all of us." The room shifted. A few cousins exchanged uneasy glances, some nodding, their silence finally breaking into murmurs of agreement. The weight of their support settled on me like a cloak I hadn't realized I was allowed to wear. Mom sat frozen, her stare pinned to me as though willing me to back down. Goldie sneered, her lip curling, but it only made her look smaller. I straightened, lifting my chin. "If I'm not family, then stop expecting me to play the role you've written for me. You can't have it both ways, not anymore." The words hung heavy in the air. No one moved to stop me as I stepped away from the table. The echo of my heels clicked against the hardwood floor, sharp and final. Behind me, chairs creaked, silverware trembled, but no voice called me back. I walked through the archway into the hall, past the framed photos where Goldie smiled from every corner, and I stood blurred at the edges. The front door loomed ahead, its brass handle warm beneath my palm. As I pulled it open, the humid Charleston night rushed in, carrying me out into the dark where my own silence finally belonged to me. In the days that followed, the phone calls began. At first, I let them ring unanswered, the sound too tightly wound to my raw nerves. But eventually, I picked up. One cousin, her voice hushed, said she admired me for saying what everyone else had noticed but never dared to name. Another apologized for sitting silent while Mom drew the line in front of me. Their words didn't erase the sting of that night, but they softened the edges. Aunt Meredith called on Saturday, steady as always. "Come to my place for Sunday dinner," she said. "Family is who respects you at the table, not who denies you a plate." Her words settled in me like an anchor, something sure in the shifting tide. Mom's message came later, short and cold. "You embarrassed me. Don't expect an apology." It carried the same clipped tone she used when bills were late after Dad died, the tone that meant nothing would move her. Goldie, predictably, took to social media. Her post about jealous siblings drew sympathetic comments from her friends, a carefully staged photo of her children in matching outfits attached. I scrolled past it without pause. She could keep her stage. I had stepped off mine. At night, when the house was quiet, I replayed the dinner in my mind, the clatter of my chair, Aunt Meredith's voice, the hush that followed my words. For years I'd feared speaking would break me. Instead, it had broken something else, the illusion that silence was survival. I began to realize that shame no longer sat with me. It sat with those who had stayed quiet while I was erased, and it was theirs to carry now. Within a month, I signed the lease on a narrow brick townhouse tucked into Charleston's historic district, just a few streets from the harbor. The windows overlooked the cobblestones, and at night I could hear the ship's horns drifting across the water. It wasn't grand, but it was mine walls that held no expectations, no old photographs of me half hidden at the edges. The first dinner I hosted there was simple roasted chicken, fresh bread from the corner bakery, wine poured into mismatched glasses I'd collected over the years. Aunt Meredith arrived first, carrying peach cobbler still warm from her oven. Soon after, a few cousins came in, their laughter filling the narrow stairwell as they carried trays and bowls. By the time we sat down, the table was crowded with food and conversation, each chair taken, every plate full. I looked around at their faces that hadn't looked away the night I stood against my mother. They passed the bread, clinked glasses, and asked me about my work, my plans, my dreams. No one demanded I prove my worth. No one called me dramatic for asking to be seen. As I refilled Aunt Meredith's glass, the words formed quietly in my chest. Family isn't the ones who eat steak while you sit hungry. It's the ones who make room at the table. The memory of Mom's house, the gleaming plates, the cold stares, the silence that swallowed me whole no longer ached the way it once did. That silence hadn't been rejection. It had been liberation. The sound of a door finally closing so I could walk through another. In the end, what makes you family, the blood that excludes you, or the love that refuses to leave you hungry? The mug slipped from my fingers, smashing into jagged pieces across the tile. My father's voice came at me like a strike. "What have you done?" "Adriana." The words were a demand, not a question. He stood in the doorway, broad shoulders stiff under his pressed shirt, eyes narrowing like he was bracing for the worst. I straightened my back, one hand resting lightly against the curve that barely showed beneath my sweater. "I'm pregnant." My voice didn't shake. Not this time. The silence that followed was heavy enough to pull the air from the room. My mother, Lorraine, froze halfway down the stairs, her lips pressed into a pale line, eyes cool, not concerned. She didn't move closer. She didn't ask anything. Richard's face darkened. "Who is he?" "Some dropout you met in a parking lot. You've destroyed your life." He took a step forward, jaw clenched so tight I thought something might crack. I kept my voice even. "His name doesn't matter. I love my child, and I'm keeping it." His laugh was bitter, sharp. "We gave you everything, a home, a future, a college fund, and you threw it away for this. I didn't throw anything away." I said, "You're just angry you can't control me anymore." That was it. His voice rose, filling the kitchen. "Get out. Pack your things. You want to play adult live like one." I glanced at my mother, for half a second. I thought she might say something in my defense. Instead, she shook her head slowly, like she was watching someone make an irredeemable mistake. "They didn't ask if I was safe. They didn't ask if I had a plan. They didn't ask if I was ready." I walked upstairs, each step steady. My room was as I'd left it that morning, posters on the wall, books stacked haphazardly on the desk. I pulled my duffel bag from the closet, stuffing clothes into it without folding them. No one knew I had signed a lease on a small studio apartment across town. No one knew I'd been working part-time for months. And no one knew the truth about the baby's father, something they wouldn't believe even if I told them. When I walked out the front door, the air was cool against my face. I didn't look back. My fingers tightened around the strap of the duffel. The weight of it nothing compared to what I carried inside. I already had somewhere to go. The door to my new apartment shut with a hollow thud, the sound echoing in the empty space. The air inside was colder than outside, seeping through a cracked window that whistled whenever the wind shifted. I dropped my duffel in the corner and sat on the bare floor, my knees drawn up, my breath visible in the dim light from the single bulb overhead. From my bag, I pulled out the can of soup I'd bought earlier and opened it with the small camping opener I kept on my keychain. No stove yet. No microwave, just a spoon and the determination to eat something. The metallic tang of the soup was sharp in my mouth, but I kept going until the can was empty. My phone stayed silent. Not a call, not a text. The last time I'd heard from any of them was in that kitchen. I hadn't expected an apology, but some part of me had thought someone might check to see if I was okay. That part of me was wrong. 2 months earlier, I had signed the lease to this place in the back office of a tired-looking rental agency, the manager barely glancing up as I slid the deposit across the desk. I had smiled then, knowing it was mine. Around the same time, I'd gotten a job at a small medical clinic on the edge of town. The hours were early, the pay modest, but it was steady and mine to keep as long as I showed up. Sitting there now, I pressed my hand to my stomach, feeling nothing yet, but knowing everything was different. I wasn't just building a life for me anymore. I was building one for the child who would never, not for a single second, feel like they weren't wanted. The cold bit deeper as the night wore on, but I lay down on the second-hand mattress I'd picked up that afternoon, wrapping my coat tight around me. I stared at the cracked ceiling until my eyes grew heavy, holding on to the one truth that kept me warm tomorrow. I would start. The clinic sat in a converted brick house just off the main road, the kind of place you might miss if you weren't looking for it. On my first morning, I stood behind the reception desk with my hands tucked under the counter, half expecting Dr. Weston Hale to look me over and decide I wasn't worth the trouble. Instead, he handed me a stack of intake forms and said, "You'll figure it out. Coffee's in the break room." He didn't flinch at my age. He didn't comment on the way I sometimes rested my hand on my growing belly. He didn't ask about the father. He treated me like I belonged there. The work was steady scheduling patients, answering calls, managing the waiting room, and I found myself staying a few minutes late each day just to organize the filing cabinet or wipe down the counter. At night, back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and combed through free courses in accounting, budgeting, and business law. I didn't know exactly where I was heading, but I knew I wouldn't stay behind a reception desk forever. No one at the clinic knew the truth about Landon's father. He wasn't dangerous, and he wasn't a mistake. He was a first-year med resident I'd met during his short rotation at the clinic. We'd shared a few weeks that felt like something more. But when I told him I was pregnant, his family's response was swift and cold. They had money, reputation, and a future mapped out for him that didn't include me. He offered money. I told him no. I didn't want Landon to grow up thinking he was a transaction. I wanted him to be mine, fully and without condition. Sometimes, when I passed the framed certificates on Dr. Hale's office wall, I'd think about the man I once knew and wonder if our paths would ever cross again. It wasn't a wish or a fear, just a question I couldn't quite silence. For now, my focus stayed here answering phones, learning skills, and building something steady enough to carry both of us forward. By the time winter settled in, my days blurred together. I worked at the clinic from dawn until late afternoon, then took the bus across town to a call center job that stretched deep into the night. The hours paid for rent, groceries, and prenatal vitamins, but they also chipped away at me in ways I didn't want to admit. At 7 months pregnant, I could feel my body straining. My ankles swelled by noon, my back ached constantly, and my stomach felt like it pulled on every muscle I had left. Still, I kept moving. I had to. One night, the cold wind cut sharper than usual as I waited at the bus stop after my shift. My legs trembled beneath me, and my hands shook as I fumbled with my coat buttons. A wave of dizziness hit, and before I could steady myself, the world tilted. I ended up on the icy bench, clutching my stomach and forcing my breathing to slow. A familiar voice broke through the fog. "Adriana." I looked up to see Dr. Weston standing a few feet away, his coat half-buttoned, his brow furrowed. Without a word, he helped me to my feet, guided me into his car, and drove back to the clinic. The waiting room was dark, but he unlocked the door, switched on a lamp, and led me to a chair. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "No," I admitted, "but I will be." He didn't press, instead. He walked into his office, returned with a sealed envelope, and placed it in my hands. "Give this to my sister," he said. "Her name's Evelyn Hale. She runs the finance office at Harrington Medical Headquarters." I stared at the envelope, confused. Why his eyes softened? "Because you remind me of someone I lost once, and I don't make that mistake twice." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The paper felt heavier than it should have, the seal unbroken but full of possibility. I slipped the envelope into my bag, my fingers curling around it like it might vanish if I let go. I didn't know yet if it was a lifeline or a test, but I knew I couldn't leave it unopened forever. 2 months after that night at the bus stop, the world narrowed to the sound of my own heartbeat and the sterile hum of the hospital room. Hours blurred into one another, but when they placed him in my arms, everything became sharply, painfully clear. Landon Voss. He was smaller than I'd imagined, with fists curled tight like he was holding on to something invisible, and eyes that opened slowly, searching for a face he didn't yet know but already trusted. I traced a finger over his cheek and felt a rush of something so fierce it almost hurt. I had thought I knew love before, but this was different, an anchor and a fire all at once. In that moment, I made a promise. He would never wonder if he was wanted. He would never doubt his place in my life, no matter how hard it became. I would make sure the world felt safe in his hands. The weeks after his birth were a haze of sleepless nights and quiet determination. Evelyn Hale called me 2 days after we came home from the hospital. Her voice was brisk, but not unkind. "My brother says you're reliable." She said, "I need someone to handle data entry and financial reporting. It's remote, flexible hours. You'll get paid per project." It wasn't glamorous, but it was a door. I said yes before she finished explaining the pay. My days became a rotation feeding Landon, rocking him to sleep, typing reports at the kitchen table, then picking him up again when he stirred. The click of the keyboard mixed with his soft breathing became the soundtrack of my life. I worked with one hand while cradling him with the other, the screen glowing in the dim light of our apartment. There were moments when exhaustion pulled at me like a tide, when I'd stare at the clock at 3 a.m. and wonder how many more hours I could keep going. But then, Landon would make a small sound in his sleep, his tiny hand reaching out as if to make sure I was still there. And I'd remember exactly why I couldn't stop. Each report I sent back to Evelyn was clean, on time, and double-checked. I didn't ask for praise. I asked for more work. Slowly, the projects came more often, and with them, the faintest sense that I was building something beyond survival. Every night ended the same Landon asleep in his crib, my laptop open, and me refusing to shut it until the last report was sent. I didn't have much yet, but I had him and I had movement forward. 2 years later, my days had a rhythm: early mornings with Landon over oatmeal and orange slices, afternoons balancing spreadsheets and expense reports, nights spent on online certification courses while he slept. I was moving forward, step by deliberate step. Then the email came. Harrington Medical, budget review and staffing changes. I read it twice, my stomach tightening. There would be cuts across departments, remote contractors among the first to be reviewed. The timing couldn't have been worse. I'd just enrolled in an advanced accounting course. The tuition paid from my savings. Losing this work would mean starting over again, and I didn't have the luxury of time. The pressure sharpened when I overheard a senior colleague, Marla, on a call. "She's talented." "Sure, but she's a single mom working from home. We need people who can commit fully." Her words burned, but I bit them down. If they thought my life was a limitation, I'd make sure it became proof of the opposite. When an important corporate account began showing inconsistencies, I volunteered to review it even though it wasn't assigned to me. I worked after hours for 3 straight weeks, unpaid, combing through thousands of line items while Landon sat beside me with coloring books. The deeper I went, the more I realized the discrepancies were large enough to jeopardize the entire contract. I organized the findings into a detailed report, complete with solutions, and sent it directly to Evelyn. She called the next morning. "You just saved us a 7-figure account," she said. There was a pause. Then, softer, "Don't worry about your position. Adriana, you've earned your place here." From that day forward, things shifted. Evelyn began copying me on higher-level communications, asking my input on processes beyond my role. The unspoken message was clear: she trusted me. I knew it didn't guarantee safety forever. Jobs could still vanish, budgets could still change. But for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just clinging to a rung on the ladder, I was climbing it. The townhouse wasn't large, but it was ours. A narrow front yard with a strip of grass for Landon to play on, clean hardwood floors inside, and a door no one could kick me out of. The first thing I unpacked was a framed photo from his first birthday cake smeared across his cheeks, his smile wide and unguarded. I set it on a small table by the entryway so it would be the first thing we saw when we came home. My wardrobe shifted slowly. I hunted thrift stores for fitted blazers, simple blouses, and low-heeled shoes that made me look like I belonged in the meetings Evelyn sometimes invited me to. Walking into the grocery store or the bank, I noticed the difference in how people addressed me: less like a girl figuring things out, more like a woman with somewhere to be. My parents remained silent, no calls, no letters. But I still heard about them in passing from my aunt's holiday newsletters or mutual acquaintances who didn't realize they were speaking to the daughter they'd erased. Richard had joined the board of a local charity. Lorraine hosted holiday dinners, seating guests at a table decorated with expensive centerpieces. They smiled in photographs, proud of their polished family. One evening, after putting Landon to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with that birthday photo in my hands. For a moment, I considered slipping it into an envelope with no return address, letting them see the face of the boy they'd never met. I imagined their reaction curiosity, maybe even regret, but the thought soured quickly. They hadn't earned that piece of him. His story, our story, belonged to us until I decided otherwise. I placed the frame back on the table by the door, exactly where it had been, and turned off the light. I was 26 when Evelyn asked me to step into a conference room I'd never been in before glass walls, leather chairs, and a view of the city that made me stand a little straighter. 2 executives were seated at the far end of the table, folders in front of them. Evelyn slid one toward me. "We're restructuring," she said. "You've been in the shadows long enough. Head of operations, starting salary, $138,000, full benefits." For a moment, I could only stare at the offer letter. Years of night shifts, cold apartments, and carefully stretched paychecks pressed in around me, threatening to undo my composure. Evelyn smiled, as if she knew every battle I'd fought to get here. "Don't say no," she added quietly. "You've earned every cent of this." I signed before I could think of reasons not to. By summer, Landon and I had moved into a 3-bedroom home in the historic district, a white-painted brick with tall windows, high ceilings, and a garden tucked behind a wrought iron gate. I paid for it outright. No mortgage, no debt, no one holding a set of keys but me. I didn't post photos. I didn't announce promotions or milestones online. My life wasn't for public validation. It was for the boy who came home from school each day, hung his backpack neatly on its hook, and asked how my meetings went. Landon was 10, now polite, intelligent, and steady in a way that told me the chaos of his first years hadn't touched him. We fell into a new rhythm in that house breakfast in the sunlit kitchen. Evenings in the garden, quiet nights where he read while I reviewed contracts at the dining table. It was the kind of stability I had once imagined in impossible detail. Only now it was real. And still. I told no one who hadn't earned the right to know. It arrived on an ordinary Tuesday, tucked between a utilities bill and a catalog I hadn't asked for. The envelope was cream-colored, my name written in a hand I recognized instantly. My mother's handwriting slightly slanted, the ink pressing too hard into the paper. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment before opening it. "Adriana, your cousin told us you live nearby. We didn't know how to reach you. We would like to see you and meet your son. Please, if you're willing to talk. No mention of the years in between. No acknowledgement of the day they told me to pack my things and go. Just a request. Simple as if the past had been a misunderstanding." I read it 3 more times, trying to guess the reason. Regret, guilt, or just curiosity now that the boy they'd never met was 13 years old. I set the letter down, my hand steady. I could have thrown it away. I could have written back and said nothing had changed. Instead, I decided to invite them no explanations, no hints about where I lived or what I had built, if they wanted to see me. They would walk through the front door of the life they once said I'd never have. I called the number listed at the bottom, my voice polite but distant. "Saturday, 2 o'clock. I said, "I'll send the address." When I hung up, I looked toward the framed photo of Landon on the mantel. He was smiling in it, a boy who had grown up knowing love without condition. They had no idea what they were about to walk into. They arrived 10 minutes early, their car gliding up the drive like they were pulling into a private club. My father stepped out first in a navy blazer, my mother in a tailored dress, both scanning the garden and brick walkway with a mixture of curiosity and calculation. I opened the door before they knocked. For a moment, neither spoke. Their eyes flicked over the high ceilings, the polished wood floors, The framed photographs. I saw the confusion. How had the girl they threw out become the woman standing here? Landon came down the stairs, composed as ever, wearing the navy sweater I'd laid out for him. "Hello," he said, shaking their hands before pulling 2 photos from the sideboard. One was of him beside a tall man in a white coat. That's my dad. He's a cardiovascular surgeon in Boston. The second was me behind a podium with the Harrington Medical logo, and Mom's the head of operations. She runs the place. My father's jaw tightened. "We thought we were protecting you," he said. "You were just a kid." I met his gaze. "You never asked if I was safe." My mother's voice wavered. "I'm sorry. For everything. I forgave you a long time ago." I said evenly, "But that doesn't mean we go back. You can choose to be part of Landon's life, or keep pretending the past didn't happen." They nodded, but I could see they weren't ready for either choice. I walked them to the door and closed it softly behind them.